FIFA just suffered the fastest, most humiliating collapse in modern football governance. Friday, August 1st, Gianni Infantino abandoned his plan to sell a stake in the World Cup to private investors, including the Kushner family, after 72 hours of global revolt that saw UEFA vote unanimously to boycott FIFA. CONCACAF and the Asian Football Confederation reject the scheme, and FIFA's own senior leadership publicly turn on him. This wasn't a policy debate. This was a mutiny, and it worked. Let's rewind to Tuesday, July 29th. The World Cup wrapped up just days earlier. The tournament was a massive success by every measure. Record crowds, packed stadiums, new markets opened. And in the afterglow of that success, Infantino dropped a bombshell. FIFA would create a $20 billion company to run the World Cup, and private investors would buy in. The anchor investor, Joshua Kushner's firm, Thrive Eternal, the Kushner family name attached to the crown jewel of global football. The reaction was immediate and volcanic. UEFA, which represents 55 European football federations, including giants like England, Germany, Spain, France, Italy, didn't issue a statement. They called an emergency vote. By Thursday, July 31st, all 55 members voted unanimously to boycott every FIFA competition if the plan went forward. Not a single dissent, not one abstention. Unanimous. That's not normal politics. That's a declaration of war. UEFA essentially told Infantino, scrap this or Europe walks. No European teams in the World Cup, no Champions League cooperation, no European federations participating in FIFA governance, the nuclear option. But UEFA didn't stop there. Saturday, they went further. They issued a statement declaring they have lost confidence in FIFA leadership under Infantino, not the plan, Infantino himself. They called the proposal a shabby backroom opaque deal and demanded accountability, identifying who was responsible and holding them to account. That's not bureaucratic language. That's a vote of no confidence in everything but name. And Europe wasn't alone. CONCACAF, North America, Central America, the Caribbean, the confederation that just hosted the World Cup, rejected the plan. The Asian Football Confederation, representing 47 countries across the world's largest continent, said no. 3 of FIFA's 6 continental confederations turned on the proposal within days. Then came the internal bleeding. Carlos Cordero, FIFA's senior advisor, a former U.S. soccer president, a figure with serious institutional weight, resigned Friday in protest. Not quietly, publicly, explicitly in protest of the privatization scheme. And FIFA's chief operating officer, Kevin Lamour, went public Friday saying FIFA staff were deceived about the plan. The people running FIFA's day-to-day operations were blindsided by their own president's biggest initiative. So by Friday, Infantino had lost Europe unanimously, lost North America and Asia, lost his senior advisor, and lost the confidence of his own operational leadership. And Friday, he folded. The plan's dead. The $20 billion privatization scheme announced Tuesday was scrapped by Friday, 3 days. Now, here's why this matters beyond the immediate drama. FIFA is not a normal organization. It's a global governing body with more member nations than the United Nations. It controls the most watched sporting event on the planet, and it operates with very little external accountability. FIFA presidents typically don't face serious internal opposition. Sepp Blatter survived scandal after scandal for years before external law enforcement pressure finally brought him down. Infantino, elected in 2016 as a reformer, has consolidated power steadily since. This was supposed to be his signature move. The World Cup is FIFA's revenue engine. It generates billions every 4 years, and those billions fund football development globally. Infantino's pitch was to supercharge that model, bring in private capital, create a $20 billion entity, professionalize World Cup management, and unlock even more revenue for the game. On paper, it's a business school case study in scaling a successful product. But football isn't a normal business. The World Cup isn't a product to be optimized by private equity. It's a cultural institution owned, in theory, by the global football community. And when Infantino tried to sell a piece of it to private investors, especially investors with a politically charged last name, without building consensus first, he ran headlong into that reality. UEFA's fury wasn't just about the Kushner name, though that certainly didn't help. It was about process. The deal was announced before the federations were consulted. It was negotiated in private. It handed control of the World Cup's commercial future to actors outside the football governance structure. UEFA called it shabby and opaque for a reason. They were cut out of the decision-making on something they view as collectively owned, and the speed of the collapse tells you everything about how badly Infantino miscalculated. If this plan had real support, if it had been socialized with the confederations, if there was buy-in from the major federations, it might have survived pushback. Instead, it took 48 hours for UEFA to organize a unanimous boycott vote. That's not spontaneous. That's a powder keg that was already primed. Infantino either didn't see the opposition coming or he thought he could bulldoze through it. Either way, catastrophic political malpractice. Now comes the reckoning. FIFA's presidential election is scheduled for March 18, 2027. Candidates have until November 18, 2026 to declare. That's less than 4 months to decide whether to challenge Infantino. And UEFA just handed every potential challenger a gift-wrapped campaign theme. Infantino tried to privatize the World Cup, lost the confidence of Europe, and had to retreat in humiliation. UEFA's statement calling for accountability wasn't an empty threat. They're signaling they want heads to roll, either Infantino's or the people who advised him into this disaster. And with Europe making clear they've lost confidence, Infantino now enters that election campaign damaged, defensive, and facing questions about whether he can lead a global organization when an entire continent just publicly declared they don't trust him. Here's the broader context for why this landed in 2026 specifically. The World Cup just concluded in North America, a massive, successful expansion into new markets. FIFA's revenues are at an all-time high. The game is growing in the US, in Asia, in regions that weren't traditional football strongholds. Infantino saw that momentum and tried to capitalize on it with a bold financial restructuring. But that same success made the traditionalist federations, thus especially UEFA, deeply nervous about losing control. If FIFA's revenue center of gravity shifts to North America and private capital, Europe's historical dominance over football governance weakens. UEFA didn't just reject a financial deal. They reasserted political control. They reminded Infantino and everyone else that Europe still has veto power over FIFA's direction, and they're willing to use it. So what happens next? Short term, the plan's dead, and Infantino's credibility is in tatters. Medium term, watch for challengers to emerge for the March election. If UEFA is serious about accountability, they'll back a candidate who promises reform and transparency. Long term, this is a warning shot about the limits of FIFA presidential power in an era where the confederations, but especially UEFA, are willing to fight back publicly. The irony is that Infantino came into office promising to clean up FIFA after the Blatter-era corruption scandals. He was supposed to be the transparency candidate, the reformer, the guy who would restore FIFA's credibility. And now he's facing a no-confidence declaration from UEFA over a secretive privatization deal that his own staff say they were deceived about. That's not just a policy failure. That's a legitimacy crisis. For fans, this matters because it's a reminder that the World Cup isn't just a tournament. It's a political and financial battleground. Every decision about format, about hosts, about revenue is a fight over who controls the future of the sport. And this week, the football world made clear that control isn't for sale, at least not without a much bigger fight than Infantino was ready for. Bottom line, FIFA's president tried to privatize the World Cup. UEFA said boycott. CONCACAF and Asia said no. FIFA's own senior staff resigned or went public in protest. And 3 days later, the plan was dead. That's not politics as usual. That's a revolt. And it worked. Infantino survives for now, but he's walking into an election year damaged, distrusted, and on the defensive. The question now is whether he can rebuild credibility before March, or whether UEFA and the other confederations decide it's time for a change at the top. One thing's certain, the next 7 months of FIFA politics are going to be absolutely ruthless.